I just want to say thank you so much for being here with me. I have been looking forward to connecting with you because you and it's like we started our friendship on Instagram. I don't even know when. I mean, I don't even know, I don't remember. Do you?
The first time I really remember is like we kind of had our first two transfers like very similar to one another and kind of
Okay.
connected that way. Yeah.
Okay. That's what it was. And you're just one of those girls that like I look for and during those breaks, and I understand, but was so excited whenever I saw you come back. So thank you, Nicole. Thank you for being here with me and sharing your story.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on your new show.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's start. Let's start with the first question, which I usually like to do. Um, talk to us, explain to us when this journey started for you. When did you know that you needed help? When did you know that infertility was a thing? And if you can remember, like how old you were.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying the first night I even hung out with Brandon, the topic of kids got brought up. My
Mm,
parents were young parents. They were done having their kids at 27. So my life dream was I wanted three kids by 27, which sounds wild now, you know.
totally.
But I always wanted that to kind of be my life. You know, kids were such a big factor. So we had talked about it early on, but it wasn't until 2015. I was 23 years old, still really young. We got
Yes.
married. And we weren't actively trying at that time because I had a little bit of college left. But I knew I'm like, okay, 9 months till I graduate. We're going to start trying like around that time. And we did. And just casually, nothing, I wasn't like tracking ovulation. I probably didn't even really know much about that at that time
Yeah.
anyway. But slow, like it wasn't happening. It's okay. Like I'm still in school. And then in 2016, I was like, okay, now I'm almost graduated. Like something seems like it's not quite right. I learned about tracking ovulation. I went that route. Still nothing. By 2017, my parents kind of brought up like, hey, because they knew like this dream of mine to be like a young mom. So
Yeah.
they're like, okay, so how's it going? It's if you get to a point where you feel like you need to reach out for help, then that's okay, and we're here to support you and whatnot. And that kind of opened the doors to me to like sharing a little bit more because at this point I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but it kind of hurts to see like everyone around you getting pregnant, and my siblings are very fertile. And they're also getting pregnant at the same time. So that's like a happy
Wow.
thing in the family. I'm like, oh, kind of starting to feel a little left out. And my parents could see that. So um, we decided to really kind of start trying. And then once my parents brought that up, I'm like, okay, I think it's time to get a little bit of help. So I reached out to a fertility center here in San Diego. It's actually the one that Erin from My Beautiful Blender that she went to.
Yeah.
We kind of did his flip flop of centers. But I
Cool.
started there. And during this time, like when I'm finishing up school and starting to try to build our family, I'm getting like really sick all the time. Like it became debilitating. Like on a daily
Mm.
basis, I've had really bad abdominal pain and stomach issues. And I've always had really painful menstrual cycles, but I had been on birth control for several years. So I wasn't really getting periods at the time. So it's not something I had thought about since I was young. Um, but those were getting increasingly worse. So while we're trying, and while I'm trying to figure out the fertility thing, I'm also in a ton of different doctor's appointments for everything I could think of to like, why am I feeling so sick every day? But no answers. Everything would come back totally normal. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to continue on, the fertility route. So I go to the fertility center, and the doctor says, with what you're telling me, it could be possible that, maybe you have endometriosis, or you might want to get that looked out kind of before we start this journey here. So I go back to the regular OB, and I explained that to them, and they said, it could be a possibility. I advocated for the laparoscopy, and I got it, and they did. They found the endometriosis, but they found a pretty mild amount, like enough to show me the scar tissue and stuff on the screen, but he really downplayed it and just almost like dismissed it, like it could, your symptoms are probably coming from this, but it's not going to affect your fertility anyway. So I'm like, okay, well, was that an answer or not an answer? I'm like, because I
Yeah.
am so sick all the time. So I go for my post-op, and I basically said that to him, like, so like, do I have endometriosis or do I not? Because I'm so sick and I don't like know, should I be searching for another cause for this? And he goes, no, like I can see it here on the screen. You have it. Some people's symptoms are, a lot. You can have a little endometriosis and the symptoms can be awful, and you can have a lot and not even know that you have it at all. So I said, okay, that was good enough for me to kind of have
Yeah.
that answer. And then I went back to the fertility center, and that was good for them to know. And then we just got right to it. So we started with IUIs. Brandon did get his sperm checked, and he had low sperm count and motility. And at the time, they're like, well, we're just going to put the sperm where it's meant to be. So, it'll be fine. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. We didn't know anything.
Yeah.
So we do the first IUI, wasn't successful. Second, we get to the third one. And by the third one, I'm just not feeling that connected to this center. It was very busy all the time. I didn't have like a personal relationship with anyone. It just became kind of like mundane. And then I had gone over our paperwork, and I'm looking at like the different like sperm collections that they had and whatnot at the time of these IUIs. And I'm thinking like, why were you, I mean, I get it, like I would have done IUIs anyways, probably just to try it before IVF, but I'm thinking like, this doesn't, it's already statistically low for an IUI to work, right? So I'm like, with this sperm and like what's going on with me, it just didn't seem to make sense. And I kind of lost faith with the people I was working with. So the family I was working for said, oh, I know this like wonderful RE in San Diego. It's just up the street. You should just check it out, if you're willing to switch centers. So we go to a seminar at the center, and we loved it right away. It just felt like like fresh air walking in. So we go to the center and have a consultation, and the doctor is just as wonderful as they mentioned she would be. Very like great bedside manner, very sweet, knowledgeable. We had our consultation with her, and she said, look, endometriosis can really affect you in a lot of ways. It's not like the amount of scar tissue you have all the time, it's on a cellular level as well. So she takes it very seriously. And at that point, I was starting to feel a lot more validated for having endometriosis and how I felt, whereas the other doctor kind of made it seem like this is not really like a big deal or a big thing, So that made me feel good. She said, individually, if it was just endometriosis and Brandon's sperm was, wonderful, then that'd be one thing, or vice versa. If I didn't have the endometriosis and whatever, then it'd probably be fine. But the two things combined are not huge issues, but together it's going to make it really difficult. You've already done the IUIs. I do suggest, moving forward with IVF. And I think it took a little while in the very beginning to kind of grieve, like doing this natural process, but once I accepted that this was going to be my journey, I always had a positive outlook on it. I always felt like, not that I had never been through anything difficult in life, but I was fortunate to have the support that I had and the family that I had. And if this was going to be my thing and my struggle, then I would just try to turn it into something positive. So I was excited to start IVF. We started IVF in January of 2019, which is when I made this account. I didn't know who I wanted to share it with or what friends. I didn't even know this community existed. I just wanted somewhere to kind of track it. And then before I know it, I see like you and like some other people. And I'm like, wow, this community is so helpful and so big. And then my family and friends start following the page, and it becomes a thing, But our egg retrieval and making the embryos went really well, fortunately for us. We were able to make 8 embryos. We didn't test them. It wasn't recommended because of our age and whatnot. But for me, I thought, okay, well, In January, I make embryos. In February, I have a transfer. And that's just not how it went. So that was kind of the spiral of hurry up and wait all the time. And like just the disappointments and the roadblocks that like keep happening and happening. So by February, I'm thinking, okay, like what's going on now? And they're like, okay, by your next period, we'll get going. I'm like, okay. So then by March, they say, well, we're going to put you on this kind of long down reg protocol. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And so they put me on 30 days of, I'm going to say it wrong, but northestrone or nor something. It's some kind of progesterone and letrozole, and they had me play that out. Once I stopped that, they put me on the birth control and Lupron for several weeks, and then kind of a standard estrogen progesterone protocol after that.
So question, so you didn't get them tested. So normally a fresh IVF transfer would just be initial, like right after the egg retrieval, right? You know, like 5 days or so afterwards. So what was the reasoning? Was it the endometriosis that they wanted to calm down, or what was the reason?
She wanted me to do a frozen embryo transfer, one for the endometriosis, and two, I had like a light case of OHSS. So I was like very hyperstimulated, but I think even without that, because of the endo, they wanted me to do like this kind of longer process.
Got it.
So we did that. we made it. My lining was great. Everything went well the first transfer round, except for when we got to beta day. And I've never tested before getting that phone call. I've always waited. And then I get that phone call, and it's not great news. And of course, that was devastating, because you always know that there's a possibility it might not work. But at this point, I haven't been immersed in this community for a long time. So I haven't seen like a lot of other people like have failed transfers and whatnot. So I'm thinking it's going to kind of be this instant thing. And it was devastating. We jumped right back into it the next cycle, and we decided, okay, I don't want to do this super long protocol again, but I'll stick with the birth control and do everything after that. So we did the birth control, the same thing, estrogen, whatever, and my lining was good again for that transfer. And that was the transfer that we got pregnant for the first time, which I think was right around your transfers. Like we had very similar timing on that. And then when betas started coming, the first beta was pretty good. It was 150. And then that, what this community calls the beta hell, kind of started for us. Where, I mean, it always continued to rise, but not double, nothing super consistent. So we didn't know what was going to happen, but they coined this term, like, we're going to be cautiously optimistic. And I'm like, okay, so that's the start of this cautiously optimistic phase. We get to 5.5 weeks. They decided to do an early ultrasound. And on the screen, we could see everything, the gestational sac, the fetal pole. They thought they may have saw the start of a heartbeat and whatnot. So we were really excited, because we're thinking, okay, this is where it's supposed to be. We go back the next week, and it's even better news. We see the heartbeat, and it's, such a surreal, exciting moment for us. And I was surprised, because they were still using this term, like, so we're going to be cautiously optimistic. And I'm wondering, like, well, why? Like, do they know something I don't know? Because I'm only measuring like a day behind, like it's totally in range. Everything is going well. But nonetheless, we're like, whatever, we're going to be positive. I don't know why they're like this. But we come back on our graduation day, 8 weeks, and we get the news, like, there's no heartbeat. And I just remember sitting there, just everything was blurry. I look at Brandon, and he's totally like face down, will not look at the nurse who's doing the ultrasound. I'm just like in survival mode, just giving me all these different options of ways to pass the pregnancy and whatnot. I haven't even had a second to like cry or like be with Brandon for a moment. So once she kind of finally stepped out, I just fell apart, and I just wanted to get out of there. So we decided, like, Brandon would stay, get the prescription if it's something that I had decided I wanted to do. but I just like booked it to the car. And on my way out, the receptionist stopped me and she's like, Nichole, we have a gift for you too, congratulations. And there's a waiting room full of people right there. And so I'm like, thank you. And I just leave as fast as I could. And I'm just like a sobbing mess. And she comes out a few minutes later. She said, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I felt bad for her. Like I could tell it was like, kind of awkward for her too. But Brandon comes out, obviously we take the day off of work and then we just kind of stay together at home and just start this grieving process.
Yeah.
It was a tricky time for work for me because the families that I worked for are mostly teachers. So they were at their first week back at school. It was really hard for them to take off of work. I didn't know what I was doing. At the time, I didn't have great insurance. So I couldn't go the DNC route without paying a ton of money. And I just didn't know what to do. So I decided I went to work the next day. I finished the week. And then by the end of the week, I just thought, I want to start this grieving process. Like, this is really difficult. I decided to do I'm forgetting what the medicine is called, misoprostol. So I took the misoprostol, and I think that's when my journey kind of switched from being like, this is kind of a sad thing that's happening to a more traumatic thing that's happening for me. I felt really guilty, like making that decision, even though there was nothing I could do, like to make the pregnancy viable. Making that decision was hard. It was physically probably the worst pain I had ever felt, like a really difficult process. And on top of it, my body had a really hard time passing the pregnancy in general. So I took the misoprostol. I knew when the sac and like the main part of the pregnancy had passed, which was a hard moment. But when I went back to my next appointment, she's like, yeah, there's still quite a bit to kind of let go of. So then I had to do it again. So I do the whole process over again. And even then it wasn't perfect, but it was enough where she's like, let's just let your body do its thing. Sorry, my cat. I could see my cat trail on the screen going back and forth.
It's hilarious.
And so it lightened up the moment.
Yes.
And so it's like, you know what? Let's just continue to track your beta, watch it come down, and give your body a break. So that was a good plan for me. My beta took a very long time to come down. It was like weeks and weeks. The miscarriage itself took several weeks to finish off. In fact, when I thought I was getting my period for the first time, it was really just a continuation of the miscarriage, which I didn't know anything like what to expect, because when you hear about miscarriage, it's a spontaneous thing that just happens, and this was something I had never heard about. I didn't know that you could have an HCG level after miscarrying or any of this. So it just felt like a really dragged out process. But because it was so long, by the time that it was over, I was ready to start again. And I was excited because now I knew, okay, well, I had gotten pregnant and there's a possibility that the next time I could get there and I could stay there. So we start the process again, same protocol as the second transfer that worked for us. But then I started to get lining issues. So before, like everything, I had responded to the medicine so well, it had all gone so smoothly. And now it's like, I'm not responding to anything. So we get almost all the way till the transfer and it's just not good enough. So we had to cancel. And that was disappointing,
Big
so
time.
then we do it again. And same thing, we get almost to transfer, the lining's just not good enough, we have to cancel. We did switch it up that third time that we tried. And she's like, you know what, maybe your body has just had so much medicine and so much going on. Why don't we try to do a protocol that's natural and see if your natural estrogen will build the lining? And I was totally fine with that. So we tried that and we got kind of near the end, but then COVID happened and my center shut down. So that was canceled. So it was a lot, but in retrospect, I think it was probably for the best because I don't think I ever would have stopped. Like, very persistent. It's something I wanted to do. I thought I could handle it. Oh my gosh, my cat's driving me crazy. She's like all over me.
So talk about your embryos for a moment. At this
Yeah.
point, you didn't get them tested, so you didn't have any idea which ones were chromosomally normal, right?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming the embryologist or you decided to pick just the better looking ones.
Yeah. So we also got, I mean, not that it means much because if they're not tested, you never know. But
Yeah.
I would say 6 out of 8 of our embryos all came back graded good, good. So they looked like good embryos. And then I think the last ones came back like good, fair, the last two.
Mm.
So they just kind of, I think, went down the line, you know.
Got it.
Um, and then when we got to when after COVID and everything, kind of, obviously we're still going through COVID now, but the center
Yeah.
eventually opened back up. We tried a stim protocol, and she's like, you responded really well to stims. Maybe if we use stims, your natural estrogen from that will build the lining. So we did that, and that worked for us. So the lining looked really good. But I physically felt really miserable because I produced like a good amount of eggs, and now I have these eggs that would be like full enough to have a full retrieval, but we're not taking them out, so my body is really uncomfortable.
Wow.
But I'm just happy that I made it to a transfer. Like, that was such a big accomplishment at this point. So we do our third embryo transfer, which I believe was, gosh, sometime earlier, kind of in this last year. We do that transfer, and the beta comes back positive, but at 6. And we know that anything below 5 is negative. So at this point, I'm not just upset, I'm kind of angry because I'm thinking, why? This just feels like such a cruel joke, to come back positive, but then to be so low that it's almost negative. And I just remember hanging up the phone and just letting out this just screaming and running and getting a pregnancy test and just testing and seeing that line there and being so frustrated, or like seeing 2 lines and being so frustrated because it
Yeah.
wasn't going to be anything. And that was a big turning point for us because we're like, wow, we have really gone through a lot. I think that Brandon's faith in this process and just our fertility in general really started to suffer. It became to a point where there's outside people like friends and family, and even Brandon sometimes, who is like, should we continue to do it this way? Should we use our embryos like with someone else? Like, what do we do? And then I have family members who are saying the same thing, like, give your embryos to so and so, like they get pregnant easily, things like that. So now I'm kind of suffering mental health wise and in therapy and just not in a good place.
Yeah.
So we decided to take a trip, which is something that I always put off because fertility came first. And while we were there, we had a consultation with our doctor just online, and she goes, Nichole, I'm really sorry for everything you've gone through. I have to admit, like, this is not a typical thing that we see for someone on paper in your position. And where all me and my colleagues are kind of sitting around wondering, what are we missing? Why is this happening? So at that point, we decided, okay, like, we got to take a break and do testing. We need to get some answers, do something more. So we did we went right into a mock cycle, not on stim. So we were hoping that my lining could even respond to normal medicine again, but it did, which was great. We did the ERA biopsy, the receptiva for inflammation and endometriosis markers, reoccurrent pregnancy loss. Like, we just tried to cover everything. And for the most part, it all came back pretty good. I was pre-receptive for the progesterone, which I was happy to have some kind of answer, to take an extra day of progesterone. And also my markers for like the blood clotting disorders were very borderline, like almost to a point where they wouldn't even consider it a problem. But for me, I'm like, well, it's showing something, so maybe
Yeah.
there's something there, you know? So we do our fourth embryo transfer with that protocol we used for the ERA, and everything looks pretty good. My lining gets to where it needs to be. I feel a lot better because it wasn't a stim protocol, and I had taken like this little break to kind of get back to myself, like losing the weight I had gained from that cycle, and just like my body feeling so much better going into this last transfer,
Mm.
which was nice. We do two embryos. We did two embryos for my third transfer and my fourth transfer.
Okay.
We put in two embryos. Our beta came back at below 400, like in between 3 and 400. So we were really excited. You know, it could be both, but if anything, it's one really strong one. We're totally optimistic. And then beta day number 2 comes, and we're kind of right back in that position with our first transfer. But this time, for whatever reason, when they're talking to me, they're not like cautiously optimistic anymore. They're just optimistic. So I'm like, why
Mm.
is this different for some reason? She's like, so Nichole, this looks really nice. Like your betas are rising, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, what's the number? And in my head, I'm calculating what it should be. And it's barely raising 50%, not like double like it should. So to me, that's not a good sign. I think my first betas were even higher than that in the round that, you know, didn't work for us. So I'm like,
Mm.
this doesn't sound good, you know.
Yeah.
By the third beta, same thing. It was still rising, but it was slowly. And at that point, I'm like, I know how this ends. So I
Mm.
wasn't the most optimistic at that point. But they kept saying, you know, hey, you never know, it's still rising. And they just have like this different kind of attitude for some reason about it. So I go to my first ultrasound at 6 weeks, and we see a gestational sac, but no fetal pull, no heartbeat. So at that point, my betas are not great. My ultrasound looks like there's no baby there. And I just, it's inevitable what's going to happen in my head, you know? And so I remember my doctor saying, okay, this isn't legal right now. She's because of COVID protocols or whatever. She's like, but I'm just going to give you a hug, you know? And so she gave me a hug, and I just got out of there. And I was so devastated. And I had been so careful with COVID and everything. And at this point, I just wanted to be with my family. I wanted to go home, see my parents, spend time. So that's what I did. And I remember just crying the entire way home and seeing my dad for the first time. I'm so close to my dad. I was just a mess the entire trip. But it was nice to spend that time with my family. So while I was there, and at this point, I'm still taking all the medicine, I'm taking the PIO, making it to another ultrasound just to make sure. While I'm there, we're carving pumpkins because it's around Halloween and with like my nieces and nephews. And I'm getting like these really severe cramps. I'm like, oh, that's probably not great, but nothing else. And then all of a sudden, just a big gush of blood. And I
Mm.
thought, well, here we go. Like now I'm miscarrying and I'm not in town. I'm not with Brandon. You know, I'm just worried about how do I get home? You know, am I going to be miscarrying on this plane? Like now I'm kind of
Mm.
panicking. So the next morning I rush home as quickly as I can, and I go straight to the fertility center. Get to the fertility center. I'm just waiting for them to confirm that this is what it is. And on the screen, we see a big subchorionic hematoma, which is causing the bleeding, and this little baby, like heartbeat flickering away, measuring, like pretty much right on track. And I just didn't even know what to think. I had no words. I wasn't like crying tears of joy or not. I was like, whoa, like what's going on? So that was obviously exciting. But then I was thinking, like, this better work out because this would be so cruel, like to show me this, you know.
Yeah.
But I go back the next week, and baby looks so much bigger and looks great. Um, I go back the next week, everything still looks great, and they let me have a couple extra ultrasounds because I was so nervous about it. And then by graduation day, everything was great. And since then, it's been like a very easy, like blessed pregnancy. But getting there was such a roller coaster. Even like this last transfer, just so much going on with it.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Wow. I mean, I saw a lot of that, but to hear you walk us through all of it, it's like, wow, you went through so much and so much, I'm sure, an emotional roller coaster. Wow. You're a strong girl. And to have the positivity that beams from you, that's huge.
Oh, thank you. It's funny because it came to a point, everyone's always been so super supportive. Like
Yeah.
I can't imagine, I would have never experienced this kind of love and support if I hadn't gone through something so difficult. Like it's a special
Yeah.
thing when everyone's rallying around you. But it was the first transfer cycle where even like our close friends and neighbors are like, this is a lot. Like, cause then they're hearing like positive news, and all of a sudden the next day it's not good, and then it's good, and they're like, "Wow, this is crazy." So it started,
Yes.
it like starts to take a toll on the people around you too. And I'm like, I know, like I can't even describe it. It's wild,
But how
but
much
we're just
better is it to be able to have that support and not only be inside, you know?
totally. And in the beginning, it didn't take me long. I'm a pretty open person, but I didn't share much about it for a while. But once I did, I felt so much better. It's like, it's such a, it feels like such a burden to go through something this difficult in general. But then to feel lonely and to keep it inside is just like so painful, and
Yeah.
it's going to be hard regardless. But if you can at least kind of let that part go and then accept all this help and this support, then
Yeah.
it's turned out to be like a blessing that I didn't know existed, which is nice.
Oh, I love it. So how many weeks are you today?
Today I'm 26
Ah,
on the dot.
that's so great. Yay. I'm so glad it's going well for you.
Me too. I can't believe. And in fact, in the beginning, like I didn't really have any pregnancy symptoms at all. So that's kind of the added, like, well, I don't feel anything. And then I look back and I feel kind of silly because in those first couple of days after transfer, when you're symptom spotting and you think that all of a sudden you're just going to be like throwing up and all of these things, and maybe you
Yeah.
are, maybe you're not. But for me, nothing. So,
You know, I didn't get it either. I kept seeing these girls, that were so nauseous or they were throwing up and they would say, "Well, it just makes me feel better." And I didn't have any of those things. I mean, I didn't have morning sickness. If I didn't eat, then I would feel like, "Oh, I need to eat," kind of a thing. But for the most part, I never threw up or anything like that. So I told girls after that, just because you don't feel it doesn't mean you're not experiencing a viable pregnancy because not everyone feels that.
yeah, totally. We have a friend that was going through IVF, not a close friend, one of more so Brandon's friends. And she had been asking me questions, and she's not really in the fertility community per se that I know of. But I knew she was going through IVF, so I was trying to lend support and whatnot. And she was in her 2 week wait, and she had asked that same thing, like, "Did you feel anything? Because I don't really feel anything." I'm like, "Not a thing." So
Yeah.
don't even worry about it. Yeah, but
Exactly. Exactly. So if you could go back and tell that younger Nichole before this whole infertility journey started, anything beforehand that maybe would have changed your mindset or just like cheering you on or anything, what would that be?
well, I think I would tell myself kind of what I did, like what I ended up doing along the way, which is just like, there's going to be things in life that are really difficult, and you just got to be your biggest advocate.
Mm.
And for me, like to survive difficult situations, I tried to turn them into something. I don't want to say positive and like create that toxic positivity or whatever,
Yeah.
but like try to turn it into something purposeful. And for me, like I knew, okay, this is really difficult, but if I could find purpose behind it and if I can help someone else doing it, and I have the capacity to handle this situation. So I think I just tell my younger self that like whatever is thrown in your way, you have the capacity to handle it, and just try to turn it into something purposeful, you
I
know?
think that's really great advice because life is hard sometimes,
Yeah.
and it's your choice on how you what are you going to do with it? How are you going to respond to the things that happen in life? So I think that's healthy.
I think so.
And then one more thing for other women who are watching this and they've experienced loss, like you have, and this, IVF maybe didn't work the first time, the second time, the third time, whatever it is. What would you say to that girl, hearing your story?
I think first and foremost, I would just say if you need anything, I am here, because sometimes you just need to have somebody who understands.
Yes.
Um, so for anyone listening, like always reach out, always feel like you can. Um, I don't want to say, I don't think that it's right for everybody that they always continue this journey. I think that there's a point where maybe you switch plans or whatnot. But what I can say is that if you feel in your gut that you would like to continue this journey, I have no regrets doing that. It was a very difficult situation to be in, but I was persistent. And once I got there, it's not that all of this trauma and all of these hardships went away, but they felt worth it. Like I don't regret continuing on this path. And if that's where your heart is at, then just follow it. And then maybe you'll get to this point and maybe the rest will just be history,
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we hope for, right?
Yeah.
I think that's good advice. It is because like you said, for some, the plan, like you feel in your gut like I need a break or I can't do this anymore. I need to look at different options. Or you do have that, man, this sucks and it's a long road. And I don't know how much longer it's going to be, but I know I still have got it in me to keep going. Like for me, for us, that was our thing too. So that's good because it is different for everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's totally okay. I think having
Yeah,
like one or two or even three transfers might be less relatable to someone who's done six IVF retrievals and all these transfers. Like we can't judge what everybody's going through, and
of
everybody
course.
knows what is right for them, But I
It's
think
true.
just follow your gut and go with what works for you, and I hope for everybody, whether it's biological or adoption or embryo adoption, we see so many beautiful journeys that come out of this community, and I just hope for everybody that they get their happy ending, whatever that might.
Me, me too. Me too. Well, tell everyone where they can find you on Instagram, and you have YouTube channel. So if you want to mention that, feel free.
Yeah, so my YouTube and my Instagram are both at Kindly the Lens. I'm not very active on YouTube these days, but definitely on Instagram, and you can find me there.
Yay. Awesome, Nichole. Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this connection. So thank you for taking the time.
Aw, thanks for having me.